4. Worries. This side wants to deal with how the ego of man is influenced during his life and how to counterbalance, to thwart these influences. We must recognize that the human ego is not alone in acting in everyday life. The ego, in general, is not aware of the forces that act in him, and for this reason, during his life, rather undergoes these influences and remains the happy or unhappy victim. If the ego is influenced by negative forces, that is, by egos that are on invisible planes and communicate their thoughts to him, the ego is in a very bad situation, because he is unable to discern the real origin of the thoughts that pass through its brain. In such a case, the ego may be called upon to commit very serious or less serious acts, but still acts that may stain his life and reduce it to an often very painful existence. The human ego is a very easy prey to external influences. If these influences are of luminous origins, if these influences are good, the ego, here again, does not realize their origin, but at least these influences allow him to live a life that will go more and more towards order, organization, development and emancipation of the personality. But if the ego is influenced by intelligences who have the power of communication over it and of whom he is ignorant, at that moment the ego must at some point realize the profound nature of these influences, and learn by broader, deeper, more real psychology, to fight them in order to eliminate them. The ego is not, as he believes, a free agent. He is influenced on all sides, not to mention the material influences. But he is also influenced by plans of which he has no knowledge or consciousness. And it is these influences that are the most pernicious and dangerous, because they risk limiting purely human action and hindering intelligent choice on the part of the ego, concerning the actions he must take on the material level. We have looked at this problem a little bit in the seminars, and in the months and years to come, we will study it in depth. I would like to say here first of all, and I would also like to situate myself at the level of negative influences, rather than positive ones. I would like to situate the problem here in a very clear and unambiguous way. The ego of man, according to his vibration, according to the nature of the soul with which it is in connection, risks, especially today, being disturbed by forces that come from elsewhere and that aim to delay the evolution of man and the evolution of the planet. The forces are very powerful, they are very large and their scope is very wide, the entire planet is threatened. And only man, as an individual, can avoid the harmful effect of these forces on his ego, and indirectly on his personality, if he wants one day he can emerge free from the planetary action of these forces, and discover in himself a center of reality from which he can draw light, strength and orientation. We must see without further delay that there are materially men, women and children who are infected by negative forces and who do not realize it. They are totally unaware of it. We must understand that these men, women and children need help. But we must also realize that the world is a vast place and that the means are limited. But we must also realize that we now have the power to disseminate throughout the world, by the modern means we possess, the necessary information to help certain groups of people understand the mystery of the ego, the soul, the personality and the possible relationships between the ego and invisible plans, which may harm them and make their lives absolutely painful. As soon as the ego begins to grow and develop on the material level, it is unable to grasp the reality that is its own, because of the memory it possesses, because by incarnation it has lost this memory. So that the ego comes into a material world that is totally helpless, unable to realize reality, unable to remember previous worlds, unable to situate itself in relation to these worlds, and automatically subject to the influences that these worlds carry in the space and time of its existence. This is an absolutely terrible situation and one that will be corrected. However, we must realize that this situation was part of the involution, and that is why today the ego must know. The ego must understand and be ready to accept the greatest realities, in order to be able to free himself once and for all from the pernicious influences that come to him from parallel worlds, and which often influence him in such a way, that it, without the power of discernment, takes for granted and often codifies within its life as moral values. The danger is very vast and man is not aware of the danger. Man does not realize the danger. And yet, this danger threatens an entire planet, risks leading to the breakup of a civilization, and also risks leading sentient, perceptible, great beings, great mental loss. Because at some point in their lives, they can no longer bear the weight of these influences, which are constantly waging a devious war in their minds, a war that no longer dictates reason, but unreasonableness. Why today are the asylums of the insane filled with those men who are not able, by themselves, to understand the mystery of their ego and to free themselves, by themselves, from the influences and forces that act in them? Why today are so many men, so many scientists, so many psychologists, so many psychiatrists trying to free man from his diseases, from his ills? Because the situation has become totally unreal, totally ridiculous. Have you ever visited any of these places? It would be a profound experience for you to see these people totally deprived of means, to see in them the source, the origin of their mental situation, to be unable to discern between truth and falsehood, reality and illusion. And yet, through your experience, through your reading, through your contacts with men, you have succeeded in accumulating a certain knowledge that can throw clarity on yourself, so that these influences become almost impossible for you. You have a chance, a very great chance to help a large number of people understand the hidden mechanisms of these influences. And that is why I want, in the coming months, to explain to you in depth, in very great depth, the occult reality of these parallel worlds where egos, who in the past were men, try to influence, penetrate the human consciousness, in order to delay it for their personal benefit. It is a question of understanding the danger that threatens humanity, the danger that threatens the people around you, and of grasping the importance of understanding the mechanics of that danger for yourself, so that if by chance, for one reason or another, you come into contact with those people who need your help, you are up to date, and may in silence and in the shadows help their evolution and their liberation. One of the first things you will need to understand about the influences of negative parallel worlds on human consciousness is language. It is in language that we find the most pernicious influences, because these influences are less concrete. In direct action, in violence, in murder, in debauchery, it is easy for us to realize external influences, but in language we too often forget that intelligences from invisible worlds influence through the brain of man and make him say things that are not his own. Language is a precise measuring rule that allows us to determine the accuracy of the mind and the creative capacity of the mind and the relationship of the mind to the soul. It is in language that we can discern with great precision whether this or that ego is adjusted to the soul, is adjusted to its own reality. In the same way, it is in language that we can discover if the ego is precise in the actualization of its desires, or if the manifestation of its apparent desires is in reality a push coming from a parallel world. The ego that is affected by negative influences is an ego that suffers first of all from a symptom that could be called worry. All the egos affected by these forces suffer, at some level, from inner worry. Worry must be detected, in order to lead to the possible encounter of the real and the vampire ego. Worry, in one way or another, despite its veiled appearance, will always show a strategic distortion of the way things are viewed. The vampirized ego, the influenced ego, suffering from deep worry, will always show an inability to live his life in a framework of intelligent probabilities. He will always tend to create an overbid, he will tend to dramatize a tiny situation, he will always tend to do what we say in popular language, a mountain with nothing. This ego will have difficulty grasping the right dimension of an experience. It will be difficult for him to see precisely the importance of a situation, and he will always be pushed into a state of anxiety. And it is this concern that comes from the extrasensory influence, the paranormal influence, the negative influence, that comes from the parallel world seeking to influence the ego and delay its evolution. Notice that there is, in the life of man, because of his lack of clairvoyance, because of his lack of knowing, because of his lack of possibility to look to the future, a normal concern for events that have not yet clearly appeared in his mind. However, I am talking here about another worry, a deep worry, a permanent worry, a worry that never stops tightening the ego, to create net anxiety, a worry that lives in the very depths of its being and that follows and pursues him every day and every night. I have given you a very simple formula to tackle this problem head-on. The formula itself holds its reality because it comes to us from reality, and if we got used to living this formula that comes to us from reality, it could, in terms of our existence, provide us with many services. This is the formula I'm talking about. When I tell you that there is nothing serious in life, when I tell you never to take anything seriously, when I tell you that everything in life is related to forces that are either happy or unhappy to you, depending on your ability to control them, to live them wisely, to live them within a strong will, to live them within a capacity that allows you not to be demolished by the event organization of these forces in your experience. However, this formula can help people who are worried and who cannot, because they cannot afford it, get out of it. Worry is so bad, so pernicious, that it gnaws at the mind, it gnaws at it like an insect gnaws at a plant. And little by little, this spirit develops weakness, and while it develops weakness, it also acquires a certain aggressiveness against men and against society. The weakness comes from the fact that they no longer have any morals, everything falls apart in front of them. As time goes by, the will diminishes, the courage crumbles, they no longer have the natural stability of a healthy and expanding ego. Aggressiveness comes from the fact that looking around them, seeing other egos evolve, seeing other egos adapt to a natural life, pleasant, and seeing themselves, they, always in a bad situation, gradually come to hate men because they feel cheated by life. Now, for years, they see themselves clinging to the wall of defeat, and these years move forward and these egos die. And the more they die, the more negative forces enter them. The greater these forces become, the more powerful these forces become, and the more these forces, in particular cases, can use the ego to commit acts against the society of men that are punishable by justice and often lead to death. It's not about you going on a crusade. It is a question of understanding the depth of the phenomenon and of being able, with skill, when you meet these beings, to come to their aid a little, so that one day perhaps, they may cling to some wise, precise words, to some right words that they will have heard, and so that they may use these instruments to alleviate their pain. The isolation factor, loneliness, is a natural factor in these beings. Loneliness prevents them from being able to exercise in the society of men with as much ease as other egos can. They do not have the ability to perform normal egoic functions in society because their concerns cast doubt on everything. Their worries pour into them a kind of sorrow, a kind of helplessness, and this helplessness still puts them behind the column of man. However, this isolation, this loneliness, makes the mind perverse. This solitude leads to grotesque forms in the imagination. It brings into dreams aspects that they do not understand of the laws of these worlds. So that all these images, coming from an imagination becoming increasingly clever, becoming increasingly arid, lead them, during their existence, to contemplate suicide, to contemplate peace, to contemplate the finitude of their torment. The loneliness in these beings is hell. They do not have the capacity, they do not have the knowledge, they do not have the facility to enter into contact with men, to facilitate relationships with them, to establish with them a basis of fraternal or friendly communication, not to mention love. However, this loneliness becomes for them a home. And this house is getting darker and darker, and with time, there are no more windows, there are only walls. And the walls also, with time, approach the center, and with the years, with the torments, these walls crush the ego and it dies. Since I am speaking to you and you are closer to me than these beings, it is easy for you to understand the importance of what I am telling you in relation to your own lives. Already your lives, your egos are on an evolutionary path. Already they have hope, already they are using the spiritual to accentuate the delights of their own existence. But do not forget that behind all the forms you live, behind life of which you only understand a tiny aspect, there is always, from time to time, a concern. However, the same situation exists for you, although it is much more tangible, much easier to live with, much easier to overcome, because you are already in the process of understanding. But if you want to become more autonomous, more creative beings, with a greater and more real stake in life, with an infinite path to the future, with a grandiose possibility of evolution whose limits you cannot imagine, it is a question for you to understand that anxiety delays the time of your emancipation. That the concern comes only from your inability to realize in you the forces of light and the arrangement these forces make in your life when events rush to create a motive that serves your existence. That is why I tell you, when you have anxiety, when you suffer from anxiety, remember the words I told you, and also remember in pictures the men who suffer from anxiety but who do not have the chance to hear my words. Already, when you have overcome anxiety, when you can live your daily lives without the slightest worry, you will have the ability to live a life that will become easier and easier, that will become more and more real with the other assets that will be given to you to develop their aspects. But if you do not grasp the phenomenon of anxiety, if you do not understand its profound importance, even if you do not suffer in the same way as many men and women suffer, these worries will delay your evolution. These worries will prevent you from bringing to your mind the energy necessary to understand life in a perfect way, and possibly to communicate with the intelligences that evolve in parallel worlds and in the worlds of light and that serve evolution as you one day must serve it. Whatever your vision of yourself in the future, learn that today already, work must begin. I am explaining the anxiety to you today. I am making you recognize the importance of realizing that any anxiety comes, in one way or another, from a vibration emanating from a parallel world whose nature delays evolution. It is about you being able to realize precisely that any form of anxiety delays your evolution, because it calls into question the power of life in you and your personal ability to generate in life the creative aspects of these vital forces. In the parallel worlds the egos try, I am talking about the negative egos, the egos that evolve in the dark spheres of these worlds, try in every way and by every means to use their provision on the spirit of man. The laws of these worlds are totally against the evolution of man. These laws are determined by the unconsciousness of these egos. These laws are manifested by the total absence of light in the worlds of these egos. However, these egos, because of their experience or lack of experience, because of their distorted personality, are obliged to act in the way they are led, by the very fact that they do not have understanding of their world. And where there is no light, there is disorder. And from disorder grows a profound ignorance of human well-being, and that is why when these egos influence man and man is not aware of their influence, man is in great danger. Do not ask yourself why life on our planet today is as it is. That's normal. The whole world lives in worry, because the whole world is influenced by forces of which he has no knowledge, and these forces rejoice in the knowledge they have of man. And it is this power of domination that the ego, which the individual must totally break before he can begin to take an interest in the great things of the mind. Whenever you have a thought that worries you, that leads you to worry, take that thought back to where it needs to be destroyed. And it is only in the mind that you can destroy this thought. If this thought remains in you and makes your emotion vibrate, your emotion will be the fuel that will feed this thought, and will give it a perpetuity, a permanence in you. When you have a thought, as soon as you have a thought of worry, you must mentalize that thought, you must kill the emotion, because in every thought there is a corollary, and that corollary is emotion. However, if a thought creates an emotion in you from which anxiety arises, do it right away and put the axe in. Over time, you will get used to it, and every time these thoughts come up, you will be able to eliminate them. And over time, these thoughts will no longer come because these forces will no longer be able to influence you. That is why you must, in life, when you take action, always do it with intelligence. If you buy something, if you go to a bank to get money, if you buy a property, if you do this or if you do that, which imposes on you the possibility of a concern, do it before you take the action. Because once the action is taken, you will have to experience this concern. You must understand that life, everything that happens in your life, is already known. And everyday experiences are part of life's programming. And if you give life the slightest chance of allowing you to have an experience, if you give the thought adjuster the slightest possibility of creating for you a situation that will become your experience, this experience you will have to live it until the day you understand that there is only one way to live life, and this way is to always live it with intelligence. You must protect yourself when you commit an action. You need to look at all aspects of this action, so that over time you will get used to taking specific actions, well-formulated actions, well-thought-out actions, and at that time, it will be more difficult for you to experience situations that will cause you worries. The actions you have taken in the past that are causing you concern today, you must reconsider. You must bring them, these gestures, to a termination, to an end. Not necessarily right away, but you must now take them into consideration and give them a gestation period, until you have taken all the necessary actions to complete them. So that one day you can start again, if you will, to take actions, but completely new actions, actions taken in understanding the importance of eliminating opportunities in your life that create concern. Look behind you, look back in time, look at the gestures that still bind you today and make you worry, and organize yourself to stop the influence of these gestures in your present life. From that moment on, you can start to breathe, and with the breath comes the joy of living. If you have, I will give you an example, debts that are increasing your workload, that you have been dragging on for a few years. Get organized to consolidate these debts, work to eliminate them, work to organize everything in your life to finish them, to put an end to them. And when you start again, that is, when you start to breathe, at that moment, if you do something in the financial sector, it will be done clearly, precisely and knowingly. So that one day you will no longer suffer from anxiety. When you are free from worries, then it will be easier for you to seek within yourself strengths, energies, which will lead you to develop other aspects of your life. Get your life in order. This will allow you to control what is under your control. That is, you will be able to control what is possible for you. But since life always holds imponderable situations for us, when these situations occur, the worries caused by your lack of intelligence will have been eliminated, and the other worries created by life that are imponderable for you will be easier to deal with. So that, over time, your life will become very simplified. And when life is simplified, it is much easier for us to live it in depth. And it is precisely there, in the depths of oneself, that we must live life. To conclude this short message on anxiety, I will tell you something that you will understand over time, to show you how pernicious and deep the anxiety is in man. Every time you think you have a personal thought, you create anxiety in yourself.